You're listening to
Catholic Sprouts,
the daily podcast for Catholic kids that strives to plant seeds of faith. Hey there, Sprouts. Today is Tuesday, August 24th, 2021. Now, this week we are talking about the eighth and final Beatitude. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Yesterday, through the example of St. Rose of Lima, we saw that each and every saint in our Catholic faith has endured some level of suffering out of love for Jesus, and yet they did so with joy. It was an honor, even, to be rejected by the world sometimes because they knew that they were honored by God, and they were happy. And this is our goal, of course, to be happy even when we suffer in the world, because God values our suffering. Now, today we're going to talk about a difficult concept, but I hope you can reflect on it and maybe grow in holiness in this way just a little bit. What we're talking about is the gift of the cross. And by this I mean that suffering can be a gift. Now, before we dig into that, I want you to know that there have been many saints in the history of the church who have prayed for suffering, who have asked God for suffering. And God has granted this, has given them the gift of suffering. There are many that ask God for the mystical wounds, to share in Christ's wounds, where they bled and suffered and felt all the pains that he felt as he died. Others asked for physical illness so that they might share in Christ's suffering. Others received suffering in terms of persecution or even martyrdom. Now, why? Why would a saint who was so close to Jesus ask for suffering? Well, the truth is that when we suffer, we become closer to Christ. When we suffer in the right way. In fact, Mother Teresa said that when we suffer, we are so close to Christ that it is as if he leans down from the cross and kisses us. Sharing in suffering helps us let go of the things that don't matter and cling better to Jesus. This is what the saints knew. They knew that if suffering entered their lives, they could better focus on God. Now, of course, suffering doesn't always have this effect. Sometimes when we suffer, we can feel worse for ourselves, or we can even become angry with God. But when we have practiced the other 8 Beatitudes, when we are meek, when we are pure of heart, when we really quest after holiness, when we think of others first, then when suffering comes into our life, God refines us more and we take that next step toward him in holiness. Now, all of us need to remember that being a Christian is not easy. In fact, being a Christian is like fighting a battle. We are constantly struggling in this world because the world tells us to live one way, but we have decided to live differently. We are constantly fighting temptation. We are constantly struggling to be better, to convert our hearts more fully. I once asked my spiritual director, who's a priest, when it would be easy, when being a follower of Jesus would be easier and I wouldn't have to fight so hard. And he looked at me and laughed and said, "Did you think that following Jesus would ever be easy? Look at the stories of the martyrs. Look at the stories of the saints. Following Jesus is not easy, but it is worth it." And like this Beatitude promises us, if we are persecuted in the world, if we fight these temptations, we keep battling, then what is our reward? Our reward is heaven. And that, my friends, there is nothing better than heaven. So let's reflect on this, on the gift of suffering, on the battle of the Christian life, as we recite the words of this 8th Beatitude. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That's it for Catholic Sprouts today. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, continue to grow in your faith and truly sprout into the beautiful creation that God created you to be. Thank you for being part of the Catholic Sprouts community as you prepare for the coming school year. We hope that some of our materials will be helpful, and I just encourage you to sign up to give us your email list so that you then have access to our entire library of resources. We have tons of free printable things, from resources from Mary to the saints to feast days. We really encourage you to check out the link in the notes for this podcast episode and go and explore and use what we have to make it a beautiful Catholic school year.
This show is a production of the Spoke Street Media Podcast Network. For more great podcasts, visit spokestreet.com.